Midterm elections are over in the U.S. with Democrats taking control of the House of Representatives. Will there be bipartisanship or gridlock? The Wall Street Journal's Bill McGurn is here with analysis. And the U.S. Bishops' Fall meeting is next week in Baltimore. The sex abuse crisis continues to loom large. One cleric is imploring the bishops to restore order in the church. He's here to tell us more. U.S. Monsignor Charles Pope of Washington, D.C. will join us. Finally, a Catholic woman accused of blasphemy has been released from jail in Pakistan, but her life remains in danger. Director of the Center for Religious Freedom, Nina SHEA, is here with an update. The World Over begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Bill McGurn, Monsignor Charles Pope, and Nina SHEA will join us in a moment. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll be live tweeting throughout the show. Here's some news from the world over. For the first time in 8 years, the Democratic Party has control of the U.S. House of Representatives after this week's midterm elections. It looks like Democrats will have at least a 28-seat advantage in the House. In the Senate, Republicans have maintained control, flipping at least 4 democratically held seats. They now hold a 51 to 46-seat advantage. Both parties claimed overall victory after the election and expressed the desire to reach across the political divide. Joining me now to discuss the results and the likelihood, or lack thereof, of bipartisan cooperation is former speechwriter for President George W. Bush and columnist at the Wall Street Journal, Bill McGurn. Bill, thanks for being here.
Hi, Raymond.
Hey, I want to start with what you make of this breakdown. Are we going to see cross-aisle deals? Are we going to see bipartisanship, or will this quickly collapse into Trump investigation 2.0?
Well, I think the latter is more likely. Look, Americans like to hear talk about bipartisanship, so both Mrs. Pelosi and Donald Trump talked about it after. And on paper, there are a lot of areas where I think they could reach deals. Actually, I think a lot of the Democrats are closer to President Trump on trade policy than Republicans are. I think maybe on infrastructure. I think on health care, that'd be more difficult because Mrs. Pelosi regards Obamacare as her legacy, as well as Barack Obama. On immigration, I think there's a straightforward deal, border wall for DACA. But those are all on paper. And once you start going down the road of investigations and accusations, I think that all kind of goes by the wayside. And that'll be the question. But right now they're talking bipartisanship. But and here's an example, immigration. I think immigration, comprehensive reform is not possible.
Remote.
I mean, I was there when President Bush tried it, right? It's just too big to, but there are parts we can bite off. And a simple trade of giving the president money for a signature issue, the border wall, in exchange for regularizing the DACA kids, who are brought here without their consent and so forth. That, on paper, is a great deal. Each side gains something, right? Yeah. I'm not sure the Democrats would want to hand President Trump a victory on immigration that he would no doubt, and rightfully so, crow about in his 2020 run for president again. I'm not sure they're going to want to do that for him.
Well, he tried to do that. He tried that before, Bill. Remember, he tried to grant amnesty to 2 million people in exchange for the funding of the border wall, and they said no.
That's true. Some of the people would argue that after the initial offer, the people in the White House kind of upped the demand, added other conditions on and so forth. Yeah. But again, that on paper is eminently doable. It's sensible. Both sides would benefit. But I just don't see the Democrats giving President Trump a big win for getting something done on immigration where all these past presidents have failed.
What do you make of these recount efforts in Florida, in Georgia? Gillum down there rescinded his concession to Ron DeSantis, and he's demanding a recount. He said there's enough here. It looks like there are more votes to be counted. Similar for Stacey Abrams in Georgia.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, a lot of these elections were within 1%, right? So it's not totally unreasonable. I think if people feel that there are activists that are going to try to use the courts to overturn an election, I think there'll be a very bad reaction. We're already polarized, and that would not help.
Bill, when you look at the exit polling here, Catholics voted 50% for the Democrats, 49% for the GOP. What does that tell us about where the Catholic people are? Or is that just a reflection of the divided country we find ourselves in?
I think it's just a reflection of the country. I saw that. That's from Pew, right? I haven't seen the breakdown, whether it's mass attending Catholics or non-practicing. I haven't seen any breakdown on that. But I think that's largely where the country is. Look, I'm in New Jersey. I think it's the most Catholic state in the Union, and it's a almost completely blue state right now.
Yeah, no, I think Catholics swing. They swing back and forth. They're not partisans. They're really not. But they do have certain issues that they keep an eye on. And then there's the cultural part of it. You know, their ethnic background that I do think shapes a lot of their perspective on these issues.
Look at Nancy Pelosi. Look, a lot of Catholic Republicans were really Democrats who were forced out of the party by the Democrats' increasingly extreme stance on abortion. A lot of them didn't, in other words, a lot of them didn't embrace the Republican Party. They kind of found refuge there when they felt the Democratic Party was no longer tolerant of their views. So now we're in the kind of the second and third generation of this, but I think it's still up for grabs.
Let's talk about the impeachment chatter we're hearing in all quarters. On a scale of 1 to 10, are we going to see an impeachment article brought forward in the Democratic House?
Well, let me say two things. First, I think that's where the enthusiasm of the Democrats is right now. I believe Molly Hemingway was on the Amtrak from New York to Washington and overheard a conversation where Mr. Nadler's talking about impeachment, and I think he might have been talking about it against Brett Kavanaugh too for perjury. So that's where the appetite is. But let me tell you, when it comes to actually voting for it, it's a hard thing to get through, and rightly so. You know, the founders intended that way. Some of these Democrats, especially the ones who campaigned as more moderate, might say, do I really want this going into the 2020 reelection? So I think there'll be a lot of enthusiasm. The press will love it because it's a controversy. It'll be very stormy. President Trump will no doubt make comments in kind, like those directed against him. But it's a hard thing to do, even with all the enthusiasm there. And plus with the Republicans having the Senate, it doesn't really go anywhere, right? Unless they could get
They have to confirm it. But like Bill Clinton, you can impeach him at least, and that's the intention here. And then the House, the Senate won't confirm that impeachment, but at least they can wave around he's an impeached president, which is probably.
But here's the problem. One is it gives President Trump something to run against. What is a Democratic agenda? If they bet it all on impeachment, it doesn't leave much room for policy or what's a hopeful way forward for the American people. How are we going to improve your lives?
Right.
I'm not sure. Even I think some of the wiser heads in the Democratic Party are cautioning against it. Ed Rendell, I think, says legislate, don't impeach.
Yeah, well, Nancy Pelosi seems to be sounding the same hymn. We'll see if her brethren take up the tune. I've got to get to this. Yesterday, the president came out and he started sending bipartisan signs out during his press conference. Then he got into this squabble with Jim Acosta at CNN. I'm going to play a little piece of this and get your reaction.
If you don't mind, Mr. President, that this caravan was an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
I consider it to be an invasion.
As you know, Mr. President, caravan was not an invasion. It's a group of migrants moving up from Central America towards the border with the U.S.
Thank you for telling me that. I appreciate it.
That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN.
All right.
And if you did it well, your ratings would
be
much better.
If I may ask one other question, Mr. President,
that's enough.
I was going to ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President,
that's enough.
Mr. President, I had one other question, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation. Are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian
investigation
because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation?
The White House there, Bill, claims he put his hand on this intern who was trying to take the mic from him, and they took his hard pass away. Was that the right move?
You know, I think it probably pleases a lot of the president's followers. You know, I'm one of the few people, I've been on both sides of that.
Right.
You know, as a member of the press and as a member of the White House, I've seen both sides. Look, I think Jim Acosta was being a jerk. But I think it would be in the president's interest almost to pay him to continue to be there. The people watching this, I don't think it creates a lot of sympathy for them. So I'm not sure I would have reacted the way the White House does. But I mean, the behavior was clearly bad. I'm also not entirely against, I'm not really against the press asking aggressive questions.
I agree with you.
But I think it's possible to be aggressive while still being respectful. And remember, he got to ask one question. The altercation came when he tried to ask another one, you know,
Right.
insisted on getting two. So it wasn't like he was shut out.
Well, if you listen closely, he stopped asking questions and he started making statements about how he saw the president's depiction of the caravan, and he was trying to inflict that viewpoint upon the president, who reacted and shut him down. But the press, look, I've been in that position too, where you're there and you're talking to a president, but I can tell you, when I was in front of President Clinton, when I was in front of President Bush, never would I have asked them a question in that tone. And I do worry about the breakdown of civility and decorum in the White House and in other institutions of our world, but particularly the White House.
I think one of the problems is when you televise the press conference, this is what you get. You create an incentive to grandstand.
Right.
A lot of a press secretary's work is actually behind the scenes in a lot of kind of drudge efforts to help reporters write their stories, you know, to give them information. And you defend the administration's point of view. I think televising is not necessarily a good idea. Also, I think the whole idea of a White House press pool, a press building, I don't know. I'm increasingly doubtful of this. You know, it looks very important, but the truth is the people at the White House are not necessarily getting the big stories. They're there because it's convenient to all White Houses. The White Houses ladle out their news to them, and they answer a few questions, and they all have their own shrub out in front, you know, the NBC shrub, the Fox shrub, and so forth. But, you know, a reporter up in New York that knew someone in the White House, knew Kellyanne Conway or talked to her, or anyone else, or Jim Mattis at Defense, would probably get a lot more information than just standing outside there. So in some ways, it's more about TV these days than actual news reporting, I think.
I agree with you 100%. You're right. You're absolutely right. Let's talk for a moment about another big bit of news this week, particularly, you would think, for the Catholic world. The HHS Secretary, Alex Azar, released this finalized rule that the bishops started a fortnight for freedom over. They said their religious freedom was being endangered because Obamacare mandated contraceptives they had to give contraceptives to their employees. HHS has changed the rules, throwing that contraceptive mandate out. Where are the U.S. bishops, Bill McGurn?
Yeah, I mean, look, the larger question is why we had this silly rule in the first place.
Right.
I mean, the contraceptive mandate still covers almost every single employer. It's a handful of employers. And what does it tell you about the Obama administration? That it was obsessed with forcing the Little Sisters and other groups to provide this coverage. You know, it didn't really, there's a lot of ways for the government to ensure that women get contraceptives if that's what they want and that's what they determine, without forcing nuns to do it. So, you know, they took it all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court threw out the teeth in that law, which were these crushing fines that they were going to impose on the nuns. But it kicked it back to the courts. It didn't really resolve it. The courts have largely ruled against the rule. So now the new rule is designed to reflect that. And it's sensible, but it's a shame. So much litigation, so much bad feeling, so much intemperance for really nothing.
Yeah, I agree. No, it's heartbreaking, but I am astounded, though, by the people who made so much about this, and now that it's been resolved and cleared away, there's like no reaction. Nobody has any reaction to this. So
and of course,
go ahead.
A lot of Catholic institutions took the accommodation and went ahead with contraception. I mean, the Little Sisters are notable because they stood their ground and fight. The Little Sisters stood tall.
Yeah. Give me a sense of your impression of Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, resigning this week. His number 3 down the line, Matthew Whitaker, will be taking his place. Will this affect the Mueller probe at all, and does this concern you?
No, that part doesn't concern me. We've been, for years, everyone's been warning the president, don't interrupt Bob Mueller's probe. I don't think he intends to now. I have a mixed feeling on Jeff Sessions. A lot of stuff on law enforcement that he did. I think he did a good job. I think he was right not to appoint another special prosecutor on the other side for some of these problems, because I think the special counsel is itself the very corrupting provision. So I was glad that he did that. I think he was unfairly treated by the president when he was berated publicly. The president has a right to replace whoever he wants, and if he didn't like Mr. Sessions, he has the right to replace him. I don't know of any management book that says you berate someone in public to get a better performance out of them. That said, I do think that Mr. Sessions' accommodation, where he recused himself from the Russia investigation, meant that the president started off with a crippled attorney general, and I think we have paid a high price for that. So I'm hoping going forward it'll be better. Look, one reason the president waited is he now has more senators coming in, and he'll get Mr. Sessions' replacement confirmed. That wasn't so clear a few months ago.
Yeah. I've got to get to this before I let you go. 85-year-old Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg took a fall this week, breaking 3 ribs. She is apparently hospitalized. Could this be another Trump Supreme Court pick in the making?
Well, it could be. I don't like to speculate that way in another person's life. I also think that, for example, Justice Thomas, whom I admire tremendously, has to think, do I want to stay on past 2020 and risk that there's Democrat taking over that appoints my seat, or do I make way now? I mean, now they have enough Senate votes, presumably, to put Amy Coney Barrett on there without even Lisa Murkowski or Susan Collins if they decided to go south. So I think we could get, there's different possibilities here, and I never want to wish anyone ill for my gain.
No.
But I think
I'm just
some
worried
of the justices,
about whether she's able to be mobile enough to continue her work, not whether her life's in danger. She's a pretty sturdy woman.
It's like the Senate. The Senate and Supreme Court seems that you can be any age and wheeled in there and do it. You have a staff that does a lot of the heavy lifting. So that's one of the few places I think you look at old Strom Thurmond and some of the justices we've had before. Those are the 2 places in the world where you can hang on for a long time.
You are quite right. The minute you said Senate and Supreme Court are the places where you can go at any age, the first person I thought of was Strom Thurmond. Where they'd give him the document and he'd go, "Today is a fine day." He'd flip the paper in mid-sentence. Anyway, Bill McGurn, thank you so much for being here. Bill's column,
Thanks,
Main
Raymond.
Street, appears each week in the Wall Street Journal and at the Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com. Monsignor Charles Pope is next, but first I want to share this story with you. The Holy See is apparently trying to muzzle some of Pope Francis's most ardent and high-profile critics among the hierarchy. Vatican journalist Marco Tossati reports that the Secretariat of State has quietly told American bishops not to invite American Cardinal Raymond Burke to speak in their dioceses. This is not the first time that Cardinal Burke has been sidelined by Pope Francis. Burke was previously removed as the head of the Vatican Supreme Court and from the influential Congregation for Bishops. The Vatican has also instructed the outspoken Bishop of Kazakhstan, Athanasius Schneider, not to travel outside of his home country without first notifying the Holy See. Well, we received a huge reaction to our exclusive interview last week with Bishop Martin Holley, in which he discussed his removal as Bishop of Memphis. This is what he had to say about being informed by the papal nuncio that Pope Francis wanted him to step down as the Bishop of the Diocese of Memphis.
He says he wants you to become Bishop Emeritus. I said, but there hasn't been any canonical process in this at all. So I didn't understand that. I was shocked.
And you still have no explanation?
I have no explanation whatsoever. I said to him, I said, I have a right to appeal. He said, there is no appeal. A due process is only fair. Tell me, what is it that I've done that I should be abruptly, kicked out of my diocese?
We reached out to Bishop Wilton Gregory of Atlanta, incidentally, and Bishop Bernard Hebda of St. Paul. They conducted the apostolic visitation in the Diocese of Memphis. We also spoke with representatives of Archbishop Donald Wuerl to hear their side of the story. All declined our request for an interview. Joining me now to preview next week's Fall Assembly of the U.S. Bishops, his hopes for the meeting and more, is a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington, Monsignor Charles Pope. Monsignor, thanks for being here. Pleasure to see you. I was struck by a piece you wrote over the last week. And it really is, it's called A Cry of the Heart to Our Bishops. Please restore order to the church. Why do we need order restored? And what provoked this piece?
Well, I think it's arguable at every level we're in disorder right now. I think when our good Holy Father said make a mess, we've unfortunately obliged. But I think this disorder has been going on for a long, long time in the church. And I think in the article trying to reach out to the bishops and to my brother priest, and just say to us that we have an obligation who are in holy orders. One of our first jobs is to keep order in the church, and let's live up to our call.
Yeah, and you point out specifically governing, teaching, sanctifying, and that perhaps those roles, those functions have been ignored.
Yes.
In what way? How did we get here?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that most people, I mean, I've been writing for many years now in the blogging and the Catholic Register, and so many say, you know, Father, nobody's saying these things from our pulpits about critical moral issues, critical teachings that are so important for our times. And so I think it begins with a silence regarding teaching, even while our moral climate is falling into pieces. And then we get ambiguous things that go on in the church that are never corrected, things that even our Holy Father says that are ambiguous. But Catholic universities are promoting dissent, and these things have gone on for decades and have been greeted with silence, no discipline.
Festering.
Yeah.
Festering. I want to read something you wrote. And you say, so how are we in holy orders doing? There is a shocking yet persistent picture of disorder, confusion, and denial up to the highest ranks, both nationally and internationally. There are, to be sure, notable exceptions in which holy and courageous bishops, priests, and deacons have sought to stand in the gap and heal the breach, often at great personal cost. The overall atmosphere, however, is one of unholy disorder brought about by the very ones ordained to bring holy order. How do you fix this? How do we get back to that holy order that the sacrament you partook in implies?
Well, we got to, I think, maybe work with a remnant. And I guess I'm trying to appeal to, I will say some bishops have reached out and remarked in my column and thanked me, and I've also had some informal discussion. I've done about a dozen priest retreats throughout the country. There's good bishops, there's good priests, and I think I'm trying to reach them and say, let's build a kind of a coalition, even if we're a remnant now, but let's stick together, let's support each other, let's teach with clarity, let's regain the vocabulary, even the scriptural vocabulary, using clear terms that speak to people in the same biblical language Jesus used.
In the piece, you really are also asking, I think, for the bishops, and I see this throughout the Catholic media, they're calling for the bishops to somehow come up with, and they're considering a code of conduct for bishops. Now, I don't know why they need a code of conduct. It's pretty simple. You know, don't sexually touch anybody. That's a good code of conduct to have. Are you convinced at all that this Baltimore meeting will produce anything of lasting value in the sense of the bishops have no canonical authority over one another? Only Rome has that authority.
Right.
So are we building up the expectations of this bishops' meeting next week?
We could well be, just in terms of juridical things. But I don't think it's a waste of time if we remember that if God's faithful will stay, pardon the expression, but stay angry, stay focused, and really insist. And I would say also, if some of the, you know, I'm sure there's a very good number of bishops and priests all throughout the country who are very, very concerned with me. I don't speak for myself alone. There's so many of us. And if we will support each other and begin to build a strong fraternity and realize how much we have to stick together and support each other, I think we can begin. It's kind of a remnant theology I'm using here. That's very biblical if you think. God often uses small little groups of remnants.
Monsignor, exactly 16 years ago on November 13th, Cardinal Law and then Cardinal McCarrick rose before the Bishops' Conference to address the last sexual crisis in the Church. And I'll play this little bit. This is what Cardinal McCarrick said. Listen.
Some of us came to Dallas hoping that there might be the possibility of a forgiveness, the possibility of seeing a man who had done something 30, 40 years before and had lived a great life, and the people know about it, and they still want to give him a chance. Some of us came to Dallas thinking that was possible. We lost that in Dallas. In Dallas, we gave up something. We gave it up because of a very important situation in the United States, because we faced a real crisis of credibility with our people. We had no choice but to give it up. We must move forward. We must put an end to this. We cannot have Dallas 2 and Dallas 3 and Dallas 4.
What do you think the bishops need to do now as they creep toward Dallas 2?
Yeah. Well, I think, again, well, restoring credibility, I think now, we've talked about, you know, we have to be very clear, I think, that this is about homosexuality, a big culture of that in the priesthood. It's also about just not preaching and teaching, you know, moral teachings of the church, not insisting upon them, allowing for dissent to go unchecked. So I think, again, it comes back to teaching, governing, and sanctifying.
You have voices in the church, some of the bishops at this meeting saying, no, look at the data. Homosexuality is in no way involved here. This is child predation. This is pedophilia. But the data suggests something very different, actually. I mean, I've been covering this for 20 years. There is a different thing here. Why the inability to acknowledge what is so apparent in the data, in the John Jay report, in the statistical data we've seen?
There is a climate of fear. And of course, it's created, I think, by our culture that you can't say anything that's even in any way negative or untoward towards those with same-sex attraction. And I think that, again, we have to say we're all prone to sin, and we have to get over that fear, and we have to speak very clearly that the conditions here are very clearly, you know, it strains credibility to say this has nothing to do with homosexuality in the priesthood. It does. And it's very clearly backed up statistically. Father Paul Sullins has just issued a very good report with the Ruth Institute that also backs it up, a fine sociological analysis of the data. And I beg our bishops to look carefully at that, to be very careful about the seminary and who we admit, and to be very clear about the nature of the problem. But not just this, but all sins across the board. We've got to get back in the business of calling sin by its name.
What should the bishops do? If you were advising them, what are the top 2 things you think they need to do to address this sex abuse crisis that you no doubt hear from your people in the pew? It is very disturbing and disheartening to the people in the pew.
We have to speak very clearly, all of us clergy, but especially the bishops, have to get back in the business of teaching about sexual morality. We don't want to offend. We don't want to upset anybody. Well, we have to be willing. Jesus offended a few people. He didn't end up on a cross by just, you know, saying nice platitudes. We have to get back in the business of speaking clearly and teaching clearly, and then also we have to discipline in the church. Whatever happened to sanctions? Nobody seems to ever be sanctioned. I won't mention his name, but there's a renegade priest who runs around talking about the LGBTQIA agenda with no reference to repentance. There's no discipline. Nobody reins him in.
Is McCarrick a distraction? The bishops have spent a lot of time asking Rome for a canonical investigation, which it looks like Rome is not prone to do. Is that a distraction to focus too much attention on Cardinal McCarrick, a man in his 80s, whatever he did is long past, or do we need that information to go forward?
I think we do need that information. I will say, though, that I think that, again, if this problem was going on long before, this has really been a problem for the last 40 to 50 years in the priesthood and among our bishops for not teaching. You know, there's been too much dissent that's permitted. Our universities are lost. Right across the board, this bad teaching has infected the mentality of everyone, clergy and lay people alike. We have a huge, huge problem with marriage, divorce, at every level in the church. That's where we need to go.
I also think the lineage, which is something that I've sort of been focused on in recent days. It is curious. So many of the bishops, men under investigation now, you can track the lineage. They're connected. Some of them to Cardinal McCarrick, some of them to others. But this corruption has a father, and then it is passed along. Might that be a better way or a better focus for the bishops as they go into this meeting?
Well, it could be. As I say, I can't say I can personally trace all that. And again, I want to affirm that there are many good bishops, and I'm hoping that they will begin to gather together and say, let's also trace out a new path forward. Let's set up a different model.
Pope Francis has adopted a policy of silence on these sex abuse questions, particularly the McCarrick issue, the Vigano charges, but all of this is related. Is that hurting the church today.
It is, and it very gravely hurts God's people. I mean, he really hasn't been silent. That's the problem. He refers to people who disagree and want investigations as monsters, accusers, a pack of wild dogs.
Yeah.
I mean, these are things he said. And there's kind of what I would call weaponized ambiguity. He uses very ambiguous terms about things, and he leaves the faithful guessing. And I can't tell you how awkward I feel now saying these things. I feel horribly awkward.
No, I understand.
And I wish I didn't have to be, but at some point we have to say, Holy Father, we're your children. Take spiritual care, respect us, love us, listen to us. And it's so hard to break through all that.
Do you, if I'm reading it right and I'm hearing it right from people in the Curia in Rome, as well as folks who traffic there regularly, their take on this is that this is a right-wing political attack on the person and papacy of Pope Francis. Is that what you're engaged in? Is that what this is?
I hope not. I love him and I pray for him. And this goes back before him. And it's all over the world now, Raymond.
Yep.
It's exploding. And that can't just be in the last 5 years. That goes back decades.
Decades, I agree.
And I think, this is a care and a love for the church, and especially for the victims and God's good people.
Yeah. What about clericalism? We keep hearing that offered as an explanation for this sex abuse crisis. It came from clericalism. Do you buy that?
No. I mean, there's abuse of power, there's clericalism, but at the end of the day, this is basically a sexual issue. Priests who abuse are guilty of sacrilege. They're also guilty of spiritual incest. And as I say, in many cases, it's homosexual predation as well.
Give me your sense. You call yourself out in your article for upbraiding faithful over the years, for pointing their fingers at certain church leaders, and you at one time would say, wait a minute, you're causing disunity.
Yes.
What happens now when those people come forward and say things?
I am so sorry that I reacted so quickly that way, because so much of what they were saying has ended up being right. And unlike anyone, I have the instinct to try to say, no, we need to respect our leaders, and I do respect them, and I love them, but I hope I respect them enough to say, dear bishops, Holy Father, please listen, we love you, but listen to us.
No, I completely agree with you. And for many years, I had the very same point of view. Well, these are dissenters. They're trying to rip the church apart. Maybe they've spent a little too much time down at the coffee klatch in the parish and talking to one another, hatching the conspiracy theories. Turns out 90% of what they said decades ago, 100% true. And it breaks my heart to say that because I never thought, Monsignor, that I would see the sexual, theological, and financial corruption that I've seen in the last 5 years or so. It is profound, and I think it needs to be addressed on multiple levels, and the laity have a role here. What should the lay response be? This I get all the time. What do the lay people do?
Well, so pray and fast, but please stay in touch with your bishops. Insist, stay vocal. Do not easily give up. Everybody just wants this all to go away. I get that. But it can't go away until there's real reforms in place where there's accountability at every level in the church.
But Monsignor, those reforms are not going to come from this bishops' conference in Baltimore. They can't. I mean, the people misunderstand. They think, oh, the bishops are meeting. They're going to come up with an answer. Their answer is, it's moot. They don't have any power. And I only came to this recently, the full understanding of the depth of this. I didn't realize until a very few weeks ago when Cardinal Mueller sits where you sit, that no one can remove a bishop except the Holy Father himself, not even the Congregation for the Doctrine of Faith or the Congregation for Bishops. They can't do it. Only the Pope can do that. So it seems to me the solution can only come from Rome.
You're right.
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes, juridically you're right. And I think what that can happen at this bishops' conference, and that's why I'm asking our bishops to pray, our people to pray for our bishops, is that good bishops can begin to talk to each other and say, I'm glad I saw you. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. And the Lord can work through that. And I'm praying, oh, please, Lord, break through. And even if juridically there aren't going to be a lot of solutions, morally speaking, I think there can be great renewal.
Well, and if they come out of it with a unified voice and plead for their people, something unexpected can happen.
Yes, amen.
Monsignor Pope, thank you so much for being here. You can read Monsignor Charles Pope's blog by visiting the National Catholic Register's website, ncregister.com. Nina SHEA joins us in a moment, but first, more news. Asia Bibi, the Pakistani Catholic woman who was sentenced to death and then last week acquitted of blasphemy charges, has finally been released from jail. Thousands of protesters throughout Pakistan were calling for Bibi to be publicly hung for allegedly insulting the Prophet Muhammad. Bibi's whereabouts are being kept a closely guarded secret until she can be transported out of the country safely. The European Parliament has made an offer to protect Bibi and her family. Here with an update on this situation is the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute, Nina SHEA. Nina, welcome back to the show.
Great to be with you.
Great to see you as always. Give our audience a background. I mentioned in the story up top, Asia Bibi arrested for supposedly blaspheming against Muhammad. Paint the picture of the circumstances and what she's actually charged with doing.
Okay, Asia Bibi is a Catholic mother of several children. She was a field hand 9 years ago in the hot sun in Pakistan. She went to get a drink of water for herself and her fellow field hands, other women from her village, and she took a sip from the cup. And that's what started it. And they got into some hot words, as she said. They argued back and forth. And eventually the women turned her in through their imam, and their testimony has been totally inconsistent, but they accused her of blasphemy, of saying critical things about their prophet, the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Asia Bibi has always denied this. This is a capital offense under the Section 295C in the Pakistan Penal Code. Wow. In Pakistan, you are hanged. You go to the gallows for insulting the prophet. And the insult can be anything. It could be throwing away, and this is an actual case, a calendar page with a picture of the prophet on it.
What?
It could be doing something, this happened in Sudan, naming a teddy bear after a boy in the classroom whose name was Mohammed.
Oh, no.
And the children voted to do it, and the teacher almost lost her life. So it's undefined, it's subjective feeling what is an insult. So she was then put in prison, and her life is at risk from assassins. And I had a friend, I don't know if you knew him, Raymond, his name was Shabazz Bhatti. He was the only Christian cabinet member in Pakistan who was murdered on his way to work because he defended her and opposed the blasphemy law being used against the Christian minorities and the Ahmadiyya minority, which is another, and the Hindu minority.
Yep,
another minority group. So he opposed that. He was killed. The governor of Punjab, the largest province in Pakistan, was also murdered by his own security detail in Pakistan. This is for defending her, for defending Asia Bibi. All these years, people have grown silent in defending her inside because they learned that if you defend her,
you die.
You die. And so now we're at the point where the court has run its course after 9 years. And
but the Supreme Court came out and said her accusers were lying.
Yes.
They basically vacated the case, and she was supposed to be freed.
They overturned the case, and there was negligence there. They should have known that as soon as they announced this, this would create mayhem.
A firestorm.
Within the country, and it did. And the government, in these situations, happened so many times before that I've been following this in the last, 20 years. They had to shut down the internet, they have to shut down the cell phone coverage, they have to shut down all the social media to try to calm things down. And still, they were shutting down the schools, the traffic. People couldn't go to mass. Catholic schools were closed. It's created havoc because there's a mass hysteria that's directed against these religious minorities, especially the Christians and the Ahmadiyya. So,
were you surprised by the level of that blowback after all this time, that these Islamic fundamentalists would be so engaged and enraged over a nearly decade-old case?
Quite the contrary. I was totally expecting this reaction, and I think that they should have expected this reaction. I met Asia Bibi's husband and children, one of their daughters, 2 years ago. And at that time, the husband told me that he had just spoken with the High Court in Pakistan, and the justice told him that she was innocent and would be freed as soon as things cooled down. That was 2 years ago, actually 2.5 years ago. And of course it didn't happen then because the rioting started as soon as that rumor started. And here we are again. But things have gotten much worse in Pakistan. It's in a free fall of Islamic extremism, of fundamentalism. And that's what's so frightening here. And we have to pay attention to this, Raymond, because there are geopolitical consequences. Pakistan has the Sunni bomb. They have the atomic bomb, the nuclear bomb. So, you know, this is a country that has been barely kept under control. This is the country where Malala, the little girl who advocated, I think she went on to win the Nobel Peace Prize. She was advocating school and education for girls. And the extremists came after her, found her on a school bus, and shot her point blank in the head. Miraculously, she survived that. And she then went on to win the Nobel Prize. But this is the kind of fanaticism that you're seeing in a country that's very strategic and is very well armed.
These fundamentalists you mentioned have also threatened the justices who ruled in favor of overturning Asia Bibi's sentence, as well as her lawyer, who's fled the country and he's now in the Netherlands. Earlier this week, Bibi's lawyer spoke about the case from The Hague during a news conference. Here's what he had to say about defending her.
I think she deserves everything from the Western world, that the life she has spent till date was not a deserving life. And as far as myself is concerned, I being a Muslim, it was really very, very difficult task to make the people understanding that why I am defending a Christian woman. And I said, the lawyers, the judges, the doctors don't have religions. They only go for their cause, and they only see the evidence, and they only fight for justice, and they only see no one should be condemned unless there's evidence up to the standard.
Now, her lawyer is on the run. Can he really defend her from the Netherlands when we should say the Supreme Court has a petition to review the case before it? Might the overturning of this case get overturned?
It's quite possible. Anything could happen because, as you said, the justice is on the line now. His life is on the line. And there's an ever-expanding circle of people, the jailer who lets her out, the driver who drives her to the airport. Any of those people could be killed. They have been threatened. Anybody who facilitates her escape. And this has happened. There have been acquitted defendants murdered on the steps of the Supreme Court in Pakistan. Wow. Judges, lawyers killed, and human rights defenders and journalists are also very much a targeted group over there.
Give me your sense about these blasphemy laws. We have talked about these in the past, and in Pakistan. In 1986, just to give people some historical perspective, General Zia added a new clause that mandated the death penalty for anyone who blasphemed the prophet. Now, between 1927 and 1986, there were 7 cases. In 2015 alone, it reached 1,300 cases plus. What is happening, and what can we in the West do about it?
Well, these kinds of laws, and by the way, I feel the same way about the hate speech laws, and they are proxies in Europe now for Muslim blasphemy laws. The more that you stir sensibilities about being insulted and offended, the more you feel insult and affront, and that you demand even greater protections from this kind of insult. So it's a circular process. They should be abolished. It's going to be extremely hard to rescind the blasphemy laws because of this culture now. It's a chicken and egg. How do you calm down the culture when you have a law that's actually inciting this? And it's incited by the mosques. It's incited on the internet. It's incited within, the village and many, many times for political.
Well, and anybody who speaks out, if you were in Pakistan, you would be Blaspheming.
That's
By
right.
trying to roll back the law.
Right, and that's why Shahbaz Bhatti and the governor of Punjab were killed, because they were accused of blasphemy for criticizing the blasphemy law.
Outrageous.
And you know that it's blasphemous, it's considered blasphemous to present evidence in court of blasphemy. So we don't even know what Asia Bibi said, because it would have been blasphemous to bring forward
release
the
it.
evidence. Yes.
Oh my
Now
God.
she is, of course, a confessor of the faith. That's what the Catholic Church would call her. She's not a martyr. Hopefully she won't be a martyr.
She's a
but,
white martyr for all the years she's been in
But for
prison.
all the years on death row, she had to cook her own food. She was afraid of being poisoned. And that's the thing. If the courts don't carry out, take her to the gallows, the society will. The fanatics in the society will do that.
And we should tell people she's been attacked in prison. She's been targeted in prison. When this first went down, the mob went to her house and beat the daylights out of her before they
Yes.
finally convicted her.
Yes.
I mean, so we are talking about a brutality. I love these people who are worried about women's rights, human
Yeah.
rights. Where are they? Where
Right.
are the Western human rights and women's rights groups here, Nina?
Yeah, and I think the church could be doing more for her too, Raymond. She could have gotten off if she had converted to Islam, and she stuck to her faith and identifies as a Catholic, as a Christian. I know the Pope has prayed for her, has given her a rosary to her family. But I think that we are not barely conscious of this suffering that's going on in Pakistan and other places as well.
Asia Bibi's husband has appealed to the United States, to President Trump, British Prime Minister Theresa May, to help the family leave Pakistan, where he said their lives are in danger. Watch.
I am Ashik Masih, the husband of Asia Bibi. I am requesting to the Prime Minister of United Kingdom to help us. I am requesting the Mr. Donald Trump, the President of USA. We are in trouble in Pakistan. Please help us.
What is the response of the White House? What has Parliament and the Prime Minister said in England?
Well, in several countries have offered, are involved in conversations.
Primarily Italy, right?
Italy and Canada are involved, have admitted that they're involved in sensitive negotiations about her, which is encouraging to me. Several other countries have given her asylum already years ago in Europe.
But they have to get her out. They won't release her. Even though she's free, she's in an undisclosed
That's right.
location now in
And
Pakistan.
you know, others, you know, Lord David Alton, a wonderful Catholic leader over in the Parliament in the UK, he has been on the floor asking questions about his own government, about the amount of money that they fund Pakistan on a daily basis. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars every day. And so that's leverage. The United States has leverage too. We just cut about $300 million from their defense aid, but they are now asking for a $12 billion, Pakistan is asking for a $12 billion loan from the IMF. We have a lot of influence there. We fund heavily the IMF. We should be putting some penalties on this too.
I want to shift gears for a moment. We'll continue to monitor Asia
Great.
Bibi's
Thank you so
case,
much.
and I want you to come back and update us, particularly if there's a movement here.
It's very rare to see, I just want to point out, to see a government doing this kind of persecution against a helpless, illiterate Christian woman. It's unusual in today's world. Usually there are mobs, there's ISIS.
Right, it's a
and,
little
and the
tribe
government
or-
is acting like a terror group almost in this prosecution of her.
Remarkable. Let's talk about those Copts that were martyred last week in the bus. This story is very, very reminiscent of what we heard a year ago.
Yeah, in 2017, the same pilgrimage route was attacked by ISIS, and there were a couple dozen killed, including an American at that time. These were Christians going to a pilgrimage in a monastery, St. Samuel, outside of Cairo. I was just there.
Yeah, you were just there. What's the situation in Cairo?
Well, there are problems. You'll see churches everywhere in Cairo, and it was so that there are, you know, the Copts are the ancient Christians that have been there for 2,000 years.
The original Egyptians.
Right. In fact, Copt means Egypt in Greek. And their cathedral was attacked for the first time in December 16, and I went there. The compound worshippers, mostly women, attacked a suicide bomber while they were praying. And I visited that compound, and there the Coptic Church has Orthodox Church has put up a poster, and it was so jarring for me to see this. It really brought it home. These were modern female faces, photographs, rows of them. They're all martyred. They're all killed in that church bombing with the crown of martyrdom on each of their heads. And so there are two sources of persecution in Egypt. One is this ISIS and fanatical terror groups, Islamist terror groups, and that's who attacked these pilgrims and who bombed these churches. And then there's the local neighbors who are fanaticized, much like Pakistan, and they are not punished. And they've burned 500 churches in 5 years in the rural areas of Egypt, and there is no justice for them. It's done with impunity.
Unbelievable.
And they just, and the government just turns a blind eye.
Nina Shea, thank you for
Thank
all
you.
your hard work that you've done for what, decades now?
Decades.
Continuing
yes.
to, you know,
Thanks so
hold
much,
the
Raymond.
torch.
And
It's
I've
so
been on your
important.
show since the beginning.
I know. Well, you really, thank you for what
Thank
you do.
you.
And you can follow Nina Shea and her work at the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. You can find them at hudson.org. That is all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, you can follow me on Twitter. The links are at raymondarroyo.com. And get ready for Book 3 in the Will Wilder series. Coming in February, Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls, and Will Wilder, The Lost Staff of Wonders make fantastic Christmas gifts. And then everybody will be ready for the release of Book 3 in February. They are available at the EWTN Religious Catalog and at bookstores everywhere. Be sure to join us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.